"Remove your trousers now." The command snapped across the yard. 32 German women went rigid. It felt as though the war had ended only to shatter them. Every lie they had been fed about American soldiers surged back up their throats. Someone murmured, "This is where dignity ends," but no one moved. Then something unimaginable occurred. The guards stepped back, almost uneasy about what they might find. A faint ink mark appeared on one woman's thigh, pale and smudged, the sort of mark that can change the course of a war. And what that mark would later reveal, decades afterward, was something no nation ever wished spoken aloud. They arrived without a word, escorted by men who appeared more worn down than triumphant. June 1945 draped Bavaria in a green so intense it felt improper. The world was blooming again, even as ash still hung in the air, and Hohenfeld's pool camp crouched at the edge of the hills like a fresh skeleton. Fences straight, towers sharp. Nothing about it matched the nightmare German propaganda had promised. And yet 32 women passed through its gate as if stepping into a tomb. They were clerks, typists, radio assistants, women who had spent the war in tidy offices, keeping the machinery running while others fed it with blood. Their boots were scraped raw, their uniforms warped from weeks of marching. Sweat darkened every fold. Dust turned their breathing into whispers. Yet the fear they carried remained untouched. Near the front of the line walked Lissel Brenner, her fingers clenched around a stub of pencil in her pocket, the final fragment of the life she knew before the world tipped sideways. She kept her chin level not from pride, but because lowering it meant letting fear bend her spine. One sharp order cracked the morning open. "Stop there," the American sergeant said, planting himself in their way. His German was heavy, vowels bent by a country that had never tasted rye bread. He studied his clipboard as though the paper held more humanity than the shaking women before him. Then he looked up and spoke 7 words that sliced the air like a blade. "Lift your skirts above your knees." Every woman stiffened at once. It was as if the order itself climbed into their throats and held them silent. Greta, standing beside Lissel, drew in a sharp breath through her teeth. Someone at the back whimpered. Another whispered something like a prayer, swallowed halfway down. It was not the command alone. It was what the command foretold. For years they had been told what Americans would do to German women once the Wehrmacht fell. Shame before death, humiliation before mercy, and now this. A simple instruction delivered as casually as asking someone to step aside on a pavement. Lissel felt her pulse leap. Her fingers tightened around the pencil until the wood pressed into her skin. That small pain kept her tethered to herself. The sergeant stepped aside, motioning toward a beige medical tent. "Disease screening, tropical fungus, trench sores, you have walked too long, do what is asked and it will be quick." He gestured again, impatience flickering beneath his words. The tent flap parted. A woman stepped out. An American officer, sleeves short, uniform crisp, boots coated with the dust of long hours, hair twisted tight into a knot that allowed no curl to escape. A stethoscope hung at her neck, eyes sharp enough to cut steel. Her name tag read Hayes. She surveyed the line with the calm of someone who had seen more legs, wounds, and fevers than any war could tally. She did not look cruel. She did not look kind. She looked like a judgment waiting to be written. "We examine for infection," she said, her German slow but precise. "Necessary for health." The translator repeated it more smoothly. The women did not move. Then Hayes spoke again more gently. "Please." It was the please that broke them, not violence, not orders shouted like thunder, just the quiet courtesy of someone who did not intend to hurt them, and that was somehow harder to endure. One by one, skirts lifted, low at first, then higher beneath the sergeant's watchful stare. When Hayes reached Lissel, she stopped. Her gaze narrowed, as if she sensed something before seeing it. She knelt with a surgeon's precision, her shadow falling across Lissel's legs. Her gloved hands hovered just above the skin, examining without contact. "Hold it steady," she murmured. Lissel's breath snagged. She raised the fabric a little more. Hayes leaned closer. Time slowed. Her eyes settled on the faint, blurred dot of ink just inside Lissel's thigh. A mark so small it might have been dirt, but it was not dirt, and Hayes knew it. Something flickered across her face, recognition or alarm. The world dropped away for Lissel. She was back in Sudetenland, standing in a cramped office lit by a single lamp. Papers piled high, rubber stamps slapping forms, men compiling lists of families to be relocated before dawn. She remembered someone dropping a stamp pad. She remembered laughter. She remembered ink splattering her skin in the chaos. A joke then, a threat now. Hayes drew in a slow breath. Then, without speaking, she let Lissel's skirt fall. "Mild fungal irritation," she announced, her voice returning to clinical neutrality. "Apply salve twice daily." The sergeant wrote it down. The translator nodded, repeating the verdict. There was no mention of ink, no comment, not even a pause. But when Hayes stood, she held Lissel's gaze a fraction too long, enough for Lissel to understand. The American had seen everything and chosen silence. Hours later, the examinations were finished. The women were marched back to their barracks, legs burning from iodine and humiliation. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching like fingers across the yard. Inside the barrack, straw whispered beneath thin blankets. Some women wept softly, others clung to anger as if it were armor. Greta sat with her back to the wall, muttering that it was not humiliation they wanted, it was something else. Lissel did not reply. The ink on her skin throbbed like a ghost wound. When night finally claimed the camp, she lay awake, staring at the wooden beams above. The barrack rose and fell with the shared breathing of 31 women. Outside, the wind nudged the fence, making it creak like an old ship. Then she heard it, light footsteps stopping, shifting. A shadow filled the high window, a silhouette framed in moonlight, not a guard. Guards moved with intention. This figure remained motionless, as if weighing the shapes of the sleepers inside. Lissel's pulse sped up. The shadow lingered, then slid away. No alarm sounded, no lantern appeared, no voices rose in warning. Only silence pressed in around her like cold hands. She placed her palm against her thigh where the ink stayed hidden. Someone had followed her from the examination tent. Someone who understood what that ink meant. Someone who did not plan to let her slip quietly into the future. And Lissel understood with a slow sinking certainty that the instant Hayes saw the ink, a second war had begun, one fought in darkness. One fought with secrets instead of guns, one in which Lissel herself was the battlefield. The storm arrived without warning, as if Bavaria had decided to remember the war. One moment the sky above Hohenfeld was only bruised, the next it tore open with a roar that swallowed the camp whole. Rain battered the barracks, the mud, the tents, turning the ground into a churning red mixture of earth and misery. The guards swore as their boots sank to the ankles. Prisoners huddled beneath leaking roofs. Thunder cracked loudly enough to shake the beams overhead, and somewhere within that chaos Lissel Brenner collapsed. It happened so fast that even Lissel did not understand it at first. Her knees simply folded. The world tipped sideways into a blur of straw, wet floorboards, and Greta's distant cry. Fever had been climbing her spine for days, burning quietly beneath her skin like a secret waiting to emerge. Now it surged all at once. 2 pairs of boots splashed toward her. Someone grabbed her beneath the arms, hauling her through sheets of rain. She blinked through the downpour and recognized a face. Lillian Hayes, jaw tight, uniform soaked, eyes narrowed with the hard focus of someone refusing to lose a patient. "Get her to the medical tent," Hayes shouted. Another set of hands joined in. Young, unsteady, smelling of wet canvas and tobacco. "I have her, ma'am." Private Carson, barely 22, earnest for war, freckles washed pale by rain, the sort of boy who still said ma'am as if it mattered. Together they dragged Lissel into the medical tent. The canvas walls bucked under the wind. Lanterns swung wildly, throwing frantic shadows across wooden tables and metal trays. The air reeked of disinfectant and old blood. "On the cart," Hayes ordered. Carson obeyed, lowering Lissel carefully. "She is burning up," he muttered. Lissel heard them as though underwater. Her vision throbbed. Her skin prickled. Somewhere in her fever she felt Hayes wiping her forehead with a cloth. It was an odd tenderness from a woman who rarely used gentle motions. "Stay with us, Brenner," Hayes said, not cruelly, not warmly, simply firm. Then clarity shattered as another prisoner was carried in. A woman moaning, her legs swollen and darkened. The storm had brought more than rain. It had unleashed infections festering for weeks. Hayes snapped into motion. "Carson, boil water, scalpel, bandages." "Yes, ma'am." In the rush, Lissel's blanket slipped, her skirt shifted. The dim lantern light caught her thigh exactly where the ink rested. Carson froze mid-step. "Ma'am, what is that?" His voice held no disgust. It held something worse. Curiosity sharpened by suspicion. Hayes's head snapped up so fast the lantern gleamed in her eyes. She reached out almost too quickly, pulling the blanket back over Lissel's leg. "Nothing you need to worry about, Private." It was not a suggestion. Carson swallowed, nodding, but the question lingered in his eyes. Lissel knew he had seen enough to wonder. Hayes turned back to the other patient. "Scalpel." She glanced at Lissel. "Stay awake if you can." The next moments dissolved into fever, the sound of flesh being cut, the wet slap of infection hitting metal trays, the sour stink of rot mixing with iodine. Lissel forced her eyes open. Through the haze she noticed another figure. Someone standing at the rear of the tent, half swallowed by shadow, unmoving, watching. Not Carson, not Hayes, a third presence. Lightning flashed behind the canvas. When the light stuttered through the tent wall, Lissel saw the silhouette clearly, tall, still, intent, as if breathing itself would betray them. When thunder rolled again, the figure was gone. Hours passed. The storm worsened. One by one, patients were steadied or sedated. Hayes moved among them like a machine powered only by discipline. Carson cleaned instruments in silence, avoiding Lissel's eyes. At last, Hayes turned to him. "I will finish here. Get some rest." He nodded stiffly. His gaze flicked toward Lissel again, uneasy, conflicted. Then he disappeared into the storm. The tent fell quiet except for rain and the soft clatter of Hayes arranging supplies. Lissel drifted in and out of awareness. She could not tell how much time passed before another sound reached her. Canvas shifting, footsteps soft, measured, not Hayes, not Carson, someone else. A shadow slipped inside the tent. They did not touch the medicine. They did not take morphine. They did not even look at the patients. The intruder walked straight to the desk, opened a drawer and lifted the file marked Brenner Lissel. Pages whispered softly as if seeking confirmation, as if suspicion already existed, as if the ink on her thigh had summoned someone through the rain. Lissel's breath caught. The intruder paused, listening. Then with a smooth, almost elegant motion, the file was returned to its exact place. A moment later, the shadow slipped out the back of the tent, dissolving into the storm like smoke. When Hayes came back, Lissel forced her voice to work. Someone was here. Hayes stopped short. A guard? No, Lissel swallowed. They only looked at my file. For the first time since Lissel had met her, something like fear crossed Hayes's face. Not fear for herself, fear for whatever secret Lissel carried without yet understanding it. Before Hayes could answer, Greta burst into the entrance, soaked and breathless. Lissel, she rushed to the cot. They said you fainted. Are you alive? Barely, Lissel whispered. Greta leaned closer, her voice dropping to a sharp whisper. Listen to me. Women with marks like yours do not usually go home. The room tilted. Lissel felt cold despite the fever. Hayes turned sharply. What mark? Greta hesitated, then met Hayes's eyes with bitter recognition. The kind scribes exchanged in offices where names vanished. Silence settled heavy as rain-soaked earth. Hayes did not deny it. Greta touched Lissel's arm. Whatever followed you here is not finished. Outside, thunder rolled back toward the camp, low and stretched out like a warning that the night was not done. Lissel closed her eyes, but darkness brought no rest. Instead, it carried a question that gnawed at her thoughts among hundreds of prisoners. Why was someone hunting only her? The storm had moved on, but its shadow remained. By morning, Hohenfeld smelled of wet rope, overturned soil and steel that had forgotten how to shine. Clouds sagged low, heavy with the promise of more rain. Soldiers moved with unusual speed, their boots splashing mud across the yard. Something restless throbbed beneath the daily routine, an unease that had not existed the day before. Then the announcement came: all prisoners will be photographed today, identification for the Red Cross. A guard shouted it across the yard, his voice cracking against the barracks. The words dropped like stones into water, tightening ripples across every face. Some women whispered prayers, others stared at the ground. A few spoke softly of home, of the chance that a photograph might one day reach their families. For Lissel, it felt like a rope drawing tight. She knew what a camera could capture: a burst of light, a slight shift of cloth, the angle of a shadow. Anything could reveal the faint ink hidden on her thigh. She imagined the photograph resting on an American officer's desk, the mark enlarged by curiosity, by suspicion, by someone who had seen it before. Her stomach twisted. The women were marched to a clearing where a white sheet hung from a bamboo frame. A tripod stood before it like a three-legged sentinel. The photographer, a corporal with sunburned cheeks and an expression fixed between boredom and suspicion, adjusted his equipment with sharp efficiency. Next, he called. One by one, the women stepped into the harsh rectangle of light. When Lissel's name was spoken, her breath faltered. Greta squeezed her arm. Do not shake, she whispered. They smell fear. The camera flash erupted, bright and brutal, bleaching the world white. For a moment, Lissel felt stripped bare, exposed to the bone. The corporal did not look twice at her. He did not seem to notice anything at all, but someone was watching. Private Carson. He stood behind the photographer, pretending to sort film canisters, yet his eyes never left Lissel. Not like in the medical tent, not confused, not startled. This look was sharper, intent, as if he were waiting for something to surface. She turned away quickly and stepped back into line, but the unease clung to her like ash. By evening, whispers crept through the camp like ants across bread. A guard had been found unconscious behind the infirmary, struck hard across the head. No witnesses, no weapon. Then came the second rumor. The film was gone, all of it. Every photograph of the women had vanished. Lanterns flared across the yard as soldiers rushed between tents and storage sheds. Flashlights cut through mud. Voices snapped commands. The tension thickened until even the air seemed unable to move. Lissel stayed close to Greta, who gripped her arm until her knuckles turned white. This is not random, Greta hissed. Someone wants names erased or preserved. Lissel murmured that she was not sure which was worse. As the camp buzzed with confusion, another sound tore through the night. A shout near the supply tent. Two guards dragged sacks of rice and rations into the open. The bags were sliced clean, grain spilling into the mud like fragments of bone. Knives do not cut this clean, one guard muttered. No, the other answered, but scalpels do. It was the precision that frightened Lissel more than the damage itself. Whoever had done this knew how to open flesh and how to hide secrets. By midnight, the camp was locked down, no one allowed near the fences, no lights except those carried by guards. Inside the barracks, the women whispered theories like children trading ghost stories. Maybe it was captured SS men trying to stir chaos. No, the Americans did it. They want leverage, or maybe. Greta leaned closer, her voice barely breath. Someone wants Lissel out there alone. Lissel's pulse jumped. Greta, stop. Your image is the only one worth stealing, Greta whispered. Because of what that mark means. Lissel did not answer. She could not. But the night was not finished. As guards continued their frantic search, Hayes approached Lissel during a moment when no one watched. Her face was tight, hair damp with humidity. Stay in the barracks tonight, she murmured. I was not planning to wander the yard, Lissel replied weakly. Hayes did not smile. You do not understand. Someone is moving under cover of this confusion. Someone who knew exactly where the film was stored. Her gaze flicked toward the supply tent, then back to Lissel. You need to disappear into the crowd, she said. If they cannot find the film, they will look for the original. Me, Lissel whispered. Hayes did not deny it. A sudden commotion outside made them both flinch. A guard was shouting near the administrative building. When Hayes and Lissel reached the doorway, they saw soldiers hauling Carson out of the office. His face burned with anger or guilt. A stack of old prisoner records spilled from his hands, fluttering in the wind like injured birds. What were you doing in there? A sergeant demanded. Carson stood rigid. Nothing. I was helping check for missing files. The sergeant grabbed a paper from the ground and scanned it. These are photographs from months ago. Why were you looking at these? Carson hesitated. Just a moment too long. I recognized someone. Lissel felt the blood drain from her face. The sergeant stared at him. From where? Sudetenland, Carson said quietly. The word split the night in two. Lissel staggered back, gripping the doorframe. Her heart battered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Carson's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw more than innocence. She saw recognition, memory, a truth he had been holding behind his teeth. Hayes moved first, stepping forward sharply. Carson, you were never deployed to Sudetenland. The young private's jaw tightened. That is what the file says. But I worked there briefly as a journalist before I enlisted. A lie, or the shadow of one. Lissel's thoughts spun. She remembered a man with a camera in the Sudetenland office. A man who said he was documenting civilian resilience. A man who lingered near the lists. A man who watched the clerks more closely than the paperwork. She had not seen his face clearly then, but she saw it clearly now. Carson. The guards dragged him away for questioning, his protests echoing off the barracks. The camp sank into a brittle silence. Lissel stood unmoving, the world tightening around her. If Carson had been there, if he had seen the lists, if he had recognized her, then the stolen film was not only about her mark, it was about what she had helped put into writing. Behind her, Hayes placed a hand on her shoulder. Lissel, she whispered, tell me what you remember from Sudetenland. But Lissel could not speak, because the truth had suddenly become too sharp to touch. And the only question left, coiled like a serpent in the dark, was who Carson really was. A naive young soldier, a hunter following orders, or a ghost from her past wearing a different uniform. The camp woke beneath a bruised sky, heavy with decisions not yet made. Word of the missing film and the unconscious guard still drifted through Hohenfeld, but something colder had begun to seep through the fences, a tension that pulsed beneath the gravel. Soldiers stood straighter, prisoners spoke more softly, even the wind seemed to carry secrets. By midday the order came. Brenner, Lissel, report to the command tent. A shadow passed through the room as the women turned toward her. Greta's hand clamped around Lissel's wrist. It has started, she whispered. Lissel's breath tightened. The command tent was not used for routine questions, not for medical checks. It was where the Americans sent prisoners they did not want mixed with the others. Those who knew too much, those who might know too much, or those who simply made someone uneasy. 2 guards escorted her across the yard. They were not rough, but they were not gentle. Their faces carried a look Lissel recognized. Do not ask us, we only follow orders. Inside, the tent hummed with strain. Colonel Mayer, the American officer in charge, stood beside 2 men in suits. They looked wrong among the mud and uniforms. Their shoes were polished, their expressions unreadable. The counterintelligence corps. Lissel felt her legs grow numb. Colonel Mayer did not waste time. Miss Brenner, due to recent security concerns, you will be relocated to a protected area for further questioning. Our investigators believe you may possess information relevant to wartime civilian operations. Wartime civilian operations. Such a clean phrase for the things she had witnessed in Sudetenland. She tried to speak, but her throat would not cooperate. One of the counterintelligence officers stepped closer, adjusting his glasses. We understand you were assigned clerical duties involving population movement records. Is that correct? Lissel shook her head quickly, too quickly. I only copied lists. I did not know what they meant. A lie, a truth. Sometimes she could no longer tell them apart. Before the officer could push further, Hayes appeared in the doorway. She did not ask permission. She entered like someone who knew exactly how far her authority stretched before it broke. She is running a fever, Hayes said sharply. If you move her now, you may not get clear answers. She needs medical stability first. The counterintelligence men exchanged looks, reluctant looks. Colonel Mayer exhaled. Fine, she remains in the infirmary section under guard. Interrogation postponed until further notice. Lissel was dismissed with a wave, but as she stepped outside she felt it. The brief shift in their eyes. They were not finished with her. They were simply sharpening the blade. Back in the barracks, Greta waited like a drawn wire. They want you for the list, do they not? Her voice shook with anger. The list. The one from Sudetenland. Lissel sank onto the edge of her bunk. Greta, I do not know what they think I know. Greta's expression tightened. I do. She leaned closer, her whisper slicing the air. There are men here, German men who used to be security service or secret state police. Not all admitted it, not all burned their uniforms. They are hiding among us, lying low until repatriation. Lissel stiffened. They came looking for me, Greta continued. Yesterday, asking about the clerks from the Sudeten offices, about the relocation lists, about you. The room tilted. Why would they? Because you touched the wrong names. Greta's voice cracked. Because those lists were not just about villagers or people the Reich wanted erased. She swallowed. They included one of our own. The world snapped into focus for Lissel. Terrible, inevitable. She had known it deep down long before she dared admit it. When the Americans seized the files in the final days of the war, when panic swept the offices, there had been a name whispered in terror, a name no one spoke aloud, a name stamped again and again in red. German officer. A man too dangerous to disappear, too useful to be allowed to die. A man rumored to have been taken by the Americans. Lissel pressed a hand over her mouth. Greta, if they think I copied his name, they do not think, Greta said fiercely. They know. That night, as rain gathered again in the clouds, Lissel found Hayes waiting outside the infirmary. We need to talk, Hayes said quietly. They stepped into the dim tent together. Supplies clinked softly as Hayes closed the What did you copy? Hayes asked. No introduction, no softness. The counterintelligence corps does not move unless they believe a prisoner knows something worth trading. Lissel stared at the floor. I was not supposed to be in that office, she whispered. The chief clerk was drunk. I filled in for him. The list had 3 sections. Villagers for relocation, suspected resistant sympathizers. Her voice broke. And a separate column marked with a black diagonal line. Hayes did not interrupt. That column held only one name, Lissel said. A senior officer, but his orders were different. Relocation, yes, but not by us, not by the Reich. She raised her eyes to Hayes. By the Americans. Hayes inhaled sharply, barely noticeable but real. You copied the name. I had to, Lissel said. My job was to copy everything. Her voice cracked. I did not understand what it meant then. But near the end, during the panic, soldiers burned files. Someone said the Americans wanted him alive, that they planned to use him after the war as an asset. The tent suddenly felt too cramped, too hot, too loud with the echo of that possibility. His name, Hayes said, not a question, a demand. Lissel shook her head. I never said it out loud. I never wrote it except on that page. She swallowed, but the page is gone. Hayes stepped back, rubbing her forehead. For the first time, she looked shaken. You understand what this means, Hayes said. 3 groups want you now. The Germans who want silence, the Americans who want control, and someone else. Someone cleaning loose ends and not answering to either side. Lissel's pulse beat painfully. The 3rd group, Lissel whispered. What do they want? Hayes's expression hardened. To destroy everything, including evidence, including you. A lantern shuddered and flickered as if the words had touched it. Outside, a distant howl of wind twisted around the tent corners. Lissel lowered herself onto a stool, trembling. If the counterintelligence corps takes me, will you be there? Hayes hesitated. In that pause sat a mountain of truths. Her oath as an American officer, her instinct as a healer, her growing mistrust of her own command, and something else. Guilt perhaps, or recognition Lissel could not yet name. When Hayes finally answered, her voice was low. I have not decided whose side I am on. Lightning flickered somewhere beyond the hills. Wind clawed at the tent. And Lissel understood this was no longer about a mark on her thigh or missing film. It was about the night she copied a single name that should never have survived the flames. A name powerful enough to kill her, and powerful enough to make others keep her alive for now. But Hayes's last words followed her long after she left. Pray the Americans want you more than the Germans fear you. Weeks passed and summer thickened around the fences. The fear did not fade. It only learned to whisper. The morning of August 15th began with an impossible quiet, not the usual hush of exhausted soldiers or restless prisoners. A silence that felt staged, held in place by unseen hands. The sky above Hohenfeld was pale, almost white, with a thin haze that made the sun seem embarrassed to rise. Lissel woke feeling as if someone had stood over her in the night, watching, measuring, waiting. Then the first leaflet drifted down. It spun lazily through the air, catching dawn light like a wounded bird. It landed in the yard, then another, until the sky was full of falling paper. It took several seconds for anyone to react. A guard reached out and caught one. His mouth fell open. Japan has surrendered. The words snapped across the yard like a gunshot. Women stumbled outside, blinking at the rain of leaflets. They fluttered across fences, mud, and barrack roofs. dozens, hundreds. Each one carried the same message in English and broken German. Japan surrenders, the war is over. Soft, silent, final. Greta plucked one from Lissel's shoulder, her hands shaking. It is finished, she whispered, finally finished. But Lissel did not feel finished. She felt exposed, because if the war had ended, the hunt would begin. By noon, the camp shifted into a different world. Guards relaxed, prisoners whispered with cautious hope. A notice went up, repatriation rosters to be finalized within days. Names were read aloud. Most women cried when theirs were not called. Some cried harder when they were. Then something strange happened. Brenna, Lissel snapped her head up. A sergeant stood with a clipboard, face unreadable. You are on the urgent repatriation list. You board the transport in 2 days. Greta spun toward her. Urgent, Lissel, you did not register. I did not, Lissel whispered. The sergeant did not wait for questions. Pack what you have, move quickly. He walked away before she could speak. Hayes watched from across the yard. Their eyes met for a moment, long enough for Lissel to see it. This was not good news, it was a warning. That night, while the camp celebrated in quiet ways, Hayes requested Lissel in the infirmary. It was the first time Lissel had seen the American nurse look tired, truly tired, as if every secret she had ever carried had been carved into her bones. You have to leave, Hayes said softly. Lissel swallowed. They put me on the list. I know, Hayes said. I pushed them to do it. I forced their hand before they could isolate you. The shock hit like a blow. You, the counterintelligence corps, wanted you sealed away, Hayes said, pacing and rubbing her arms. The German men wanted you silenced, and whoever stole the film does not care what side you are on. They only want the last trace erased. Me, Lissel whispered. You, Hayes confirmed. If you stay, one of them will reach you first. Hayes stepped closer and pulled something from her pocket, a small brown paper parcel tied with thin string. No markings, no name. When you are far away, Hayes said, pressing it into Lissel's hand. Somewhere no one can order you, somewhere quiet. Open this. It was small in weight but heavy with meaning. What is inside? A truth, Hayes said, one I could not give to the counterintelligence corps. One the Germans would destroy. Keep it safe. Her voice cracked, not from fear, Lissel realized, from the unbearable weight of choosing a side that was not allowed to exist. But why help me? Lissel whispered. Hayes hesitated, then looked away. Because I have seen too many wars and I am tired of pretending justice belongs to nations instead of people. A gust rattled the tent. A lantern flickered. Go, Hayes said, before someone changes the roster. 2 days later, at dawn, Lissel climbed into the transport truck. Greta hugged her fiercely, whispering a prayer and something like goodbye. Carson stood nearby under guard, his face bruised from interrogation. For a moment, Lissel thought he might speak, might reveal something, but he only watched her go, eyes unreadable. As the truck pulled away, Hayes stood near the gate, hands clasped behind her back. She did not wave, neither did Lissel. Some goodbyes break if you touch them. The truck rumbled toward the new Germany, broken, starving, uncertain. It carried a woman who no longer knew if she was a witness, a threat, or a survivor of something still unfolding. Years later, Hamburg, 1949. The rain in Hamburg was gentler than Bavaria's, but just as persistent. Lissel lived in a small room above a bakery where the smell of bread softened the memories. Sometimes she woke thinking she still heard guards shouting or the groan of war-torn earth beneath her. But the war was long finished and she was alive. Perhaps unfairly, but alive all the same. She had never opened Hayes's parcel, not until today. Her niece, little Clara, not yet 9, sat beside her, listening as Lissel unfolded the paper. Inside were 3 things: a stack of fragile sheets, the list she had copied in Sudetenland, the missing photograph of her from the camp, the one someone had risked everything to steal, and a letter in Hayes's narrow handwriting. Lissel read in silence. Some truths are not meant to save countries. Some are meant to save people. This one is yours now. Make of it what you can live with. Clara leaned against her. Aunt Lissel, what is it? Lissel looked down at the list of names, German, Czech, and one that had nearly destroyed her. Her hand trembled, but she held the paper steady. Clara, she said softly, the most dangerous enemy I faced was not the one with a gun or a whip. The child blinked up at her. Then who? The one who wanted to rewrite me, Lissel whispered. Erase what I saw, change what I did, make me someone with no past worth speaking. Clara tilted her head. And what will you do with it now? Lissel folded the list carefully, breathing evenly. If I helped write a shadow, she said, then I must decide how to stand in its light. She stared out at the rain, soft and endless, and wondered what weighed more, surviving the war or surviving the truth she carried out of it. Either way, she knew this, the hunt was over, but the reckoning had only begun.